Okay, brilliant. So I'm Gwen Brekelmans. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of an ongoing project that I've worked on together with three of our psychology students, Olivia, Iman, and Devani. You're not seeing a picture of Iman here, but you have an idea of Olivia and Devani. And we're looking particularly at students' experiences of diversity, inclusion, and equality in their curriculum. Now, as we'll all have heard lots of lovely things already today, there's wonderful initiatives coming up all over the place to decolonize their curriculum, increase emphasis for diversity, make students much more aware of what's going on, and to make sure that they feel like they belong in psychology, in the cohort at university. But the question that these students came to me with is, how much are the students actually aware of what we're already trying to do? Do they notice things that we don't realize we're doing? And before we try and change anything and maybe chuck out something, let's see what it is that they value out of diversity and inclusion in their teaching. So that's the kind of question that we started off. What do they really experience in terms of diversity and inclusion in their teaching? And this project, what we did was look at our psychology students at Queen Mary across both undergraduate and masters via two methods. So a survey and interviews, with the expectation that not everyone would be happy to have an interview in more depth, but some people might be happy to fill in a few sentences in a survey to give you some idea of what they were thinking and what was working well and what wasn't working. So we took a two-pronged approach there to try and capture some broader overall data and then go more in depth on those interviews. So for the survey, we've got about 60 participants. Majority of them are undergraduate or recent graduates from our undergraduate, and then there's about 17 from our master's conversion program who filled this out as well. And for the interview, we have 19 participants so far. Now, all of the people who took part in the interview were actually interviewed by the student assistants, because if I, as the staff member, go and ask them, how are you experiencing the things, then you get very different answers than if the students who've been on the program themselves ask the questions. So that was really, really useful. And the questions that we used in the survey and the interviews were actually co-created with the students. So they came up with what they thought was really important to ask about. So for example, they asked about how we could better integrate diverse voices and theories and perspectives to help people from different backgrounds feel represented, but also how it impacted their motivation, if there would be more diversity, for example. And there's about 13 other questions I'm happy to share if you've got any queries about that. We're still very much doing the analyses. Things got a little bit held back because the students had dissertations to hand in a few weeks ago. But having a quick look at the data so far, the interesting thing that seems to come across all of them in both the survey and the interviews is that initially, the first few questions, they're like, yeah, no, everything is fine, which we were kind of expecting. So we asked the more difficult questions later on. But once things got started, the interviews really seem to suggest that there is some particular areas that students are noticing aren't really represented, but they also give really useful examples of specific interactions they found meaningful that don't even necessarily require you to change anything in that you're doing. So one example was mentioned of a staff member disclosing they had OCD, that being really meaningful for a student. But there are also some really thoughtful suggestions of what kind of impact it would have on the student's motivation. We're looking into that in more detail, but the survey data so far does seem to capture more surface level information where it's possibly mentioning specific interactions, but the more in-depth thoughts seem to be coming out of the interviews as expected. So we're looking at doing more things with that, essentially. We're looking to do thematic analyses on the interviews and then content analysis on the survey data to try and find specific examples of what's working well and give those to other staff as this is something that students have actually been finding really helpful. Have a think about whether that's something that you can implement in your teaching before you do any major overhauls. Small steps might already go quite far. And then once we've sort of had a look at that, we'll look into doing focus groups to expand more on what might be changed in the future. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gwen. So that brings us to having an opportunity just to ask some questions, and I've got lots of ideas and questions from the flash talks that we've just heard really quickly. So thank you, Katie, thank you, Liam, thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Gwen. And it's clear that there's so much work being done around the area of inclusion, and it's really nice to see postgraduates, neurodivergent students, and what can we do to embed a lot of this work in the curriculum, but also that wider student experience and that sense of belonging. Because if you belong to a space, you want to be in your space, you want to learn. So it's lovely to hear. So thank you so much to our afternoon speakers.